tend to reserve my commentary on recent polarizing issues just due to the nature of their polarization. Because every time you kind of make a comment, it's like you're staking a claim on the red versus blue thing, and it's not really about that in the overall scheme of it. However, this is one that I'm finding intriguing because it seems to be poking at the moral center of America, and it is the recent CEO shooting. Because the reason why it brings it out is because there seems to be this division that involves two specific thought questions in philosophy. One of which is it wrong to kill versus is it wrong to kill to protect your family? And the second one incorporates that as is it like, would you kill one person to save a million people? The trolley problem is also kind of a thing too. It's like basically incorporates this in an interesting sense. But the reason why I find it intriguing to see this dialogue happen is that the first question about killing a person versus killing a person to protect your family, this one is in fact one of the bigger questions that's going on in an innate sense. Because the moral high ground for this question for most people when they hear it is that, well, it's wrong to kill regardless. However, the reality of that statement is that you're saying it on top of the sensation or the feeling of that you would always go with the latter. That because protecting one's family has always been the morally correct choice. And the one that we kind of innately align with. So it really, in this case, it depends on if you're the kind of person who's aligned your morality with legislation versus aligning your morality with humanistic, more intrinsic human values. Unfortunately for the former, when you align your morality with legislation, you tend to find yourself on kind of the wrong side of history pretty often. And the way I mean this is like, let's just say, I think about your parents or their grandparents. They may not have been the kind of people that would have openly been violent to another black person back in the day. However, if the law says, you see what I mean? If the law says that they can't be there, what are you going to do? It takes a lot to align yourself out of that, because when you try to say that the law is always morally just in it, you have to understand where it came from, what was the point of it, and where was what were their times, what was actually going on in the times that they were created. Was it something that actually had everybody's intrinsic human value in mind, or was it a part of a power structure? And in the case of the second question, which is what really the topic of discussion for everyone has been on, which is killing one life to save a million. And what you see on this end is that there are a lot of people trying to humanize exactly who the CEO was, which has never been lost on anyone. But in the case of this question, it's kind of thinking about how this person sitting in this chair led this organization down a path that has in fact caused the deaths, or have led to the deaths of tens of thousands of people, it turns out. And even if you were to humanize this person, morally speaking, where are we actually sitting on? Because no one here is saying that death is the way to go. However, there are a lot of these power structures that don't get shaken until violence is applied, which is a really sad truth about our society, but it is true. It has always been true. When your structure becomes corrupt, eventually violence is applied, Look at every revolution that we've ever had in human history. Literally just look at every single one of them. It turns into a tipping point. What we would like to have happen in most of these cases where people are morally, shaking on, is that we wish we could have done this without involving someone's death. In an ideal world, that could have happened. But the reality of that is that it won't. Because a lot of these power structures are built on these people perceiving themselves to be untouchable by the common people. And that there's nothing there in this power structure to threaten them otherwise. Because what is the government going to do? They're the ones that have allowed this to go on. This is what supports their agenda as well. And not us. That probably should, if it's not blatant by this point, I have a really hard time telling you otherwise, other than simply stating that you have to look at history, and a lot of history points at how they have never truly been in the corner of people, and you can see it literally in the structure of it. Because if it was something that was meant to be run by us, by the people, not by the government. The government was not meant to run the country. The original clause of it was to be run by the consent of the governed, which is just what we don't do. So, kind of coming down on that and kind of looking down on this. This is what's happening now that we as the governed are finally understanding that this is not to our consent. This hasn't been to our consent. We didn't ask for this. We wanted something greater. And all we've been getting is essentially garbage. So for those that are trying to still say that the moral side of this is wrong to a degree because it is somehow celebrating the just death in general or murder in general, I have to say, wouldn't it be better to see a system that actually valued our lives more than it valued making money and gaining power? It would be wonderful to see that in general. Like, it would be wonderful to see everybody make it. It'd be wonderful to see that there is no longer a second-class citizenship here. Really is 3 classes of citizenship, but and I basically see it as there's the ultra rich, there's the rest of us, and then there's homelessness. And I say the rest of us, which is interesting about the rest of us is that, yes, there's, we were taught in economics about the high, middle, the high, middle, and low class, and then homelessness, and then there's 3 levels of middle class. But the reality of that is that if you are not in this 1%, you are actually just still on the grind. It just looks different comparatively to the rest of us. And I say this based on what I've seen. I mean, I live in Boulder, of all places. I've also lived in Arizona near Scottsdale. And one of the things that I've seen the most is that there are so many people that buy things that they can't afford. But they have the credit to do so, even though the money isn't actually there. It is just constantly trying to pay off loans and pay off loans and pay off loans and making payments on everything you own to own it, just simply to have it, versus what others have to do in order to own theirs. I mean, the majority of us don't get the option of actually having the aesthetic that we have to pay for. We have to take what we can get. But there are others that choose to kind of just sell out to the whole aesthetic and still end up, in fact, paying years and years and decades on decades to own what they have, if they ever do. But to the rest of us, that's a pretty big house. And that's a really nice car. It kind of makes it seem like they own that. But there's so much of that is kind of a sham. And just to make it look like we are doing better, to feel like we are doing better. But the reality of this is that this is not a gauge. This is not a proper gauge to see how well we are doing as a whole, as a society. The proper gauge should have always been at the bottom. That the fact that we have a homeless population and like apparently the greatest economy in the world, how does that even compute? How does that even compute? I mean, and of course, like a lot of people want to mention that this is about making better choices financially. But what? Are you serious? Like, have you ever been on a team sport? Are you gonna have like the most disabled player? You know, you're just gonna constantly just say that this team is all great, even though we got several players on the team that are having a really hard time being a part of the team, being on the team, because they don't have the same advantages as the rest of the team. And yeah, you're over here on the other side of the team saying, we're all good, when you can barely play together. That's what's happening. And it's wild to me that we're just looking at a part of the team and just being like, they're fine. Like, we're fine. They should try harder. When it's like they're on the team, the coaches, what are they doing? The assistants, what are they doing? Why do we have all of this stuff here to make us look good when it's not even functioning to bring the whole team together? Just because you got 2-star athletes, 3-star athletes on the whole team, you think you're all good. And you're not even one of them. You're looking at them. You're not even one of them. You're just saying, because we have these people, we're amazing. Never mind these other guys. That's why it doesn't compete to me. It's like it's completely wild. It's like you're okay with having the weak link because somehow that weak link makes you look good despite everybody being on the same team. And at what point do you think that if the coaches allow this to happen, God, I'm making sports analogies. If you think that the coaches are allowing this to happen, what makes you think that they're going to care if you end up in that same disadvantaged position? If you're all of a sudden something keeps you from being the decent athlete on the team, and you're down on the bottom, and you're just being like, well, you know, you guys all have room in your cars to get me to practice. What's going on? I mean, everybody's got a car. Like, some of you guys live pretty close. And they're all like, make better choices. How great of a team is that? Like, if you like sports, think about like society from that perspective. We're all on the same team here. We're all on the same team. You can't be looking at the star players and thinking that we're all good. Because that's what we do as a society. We look at the richest people here, and we're conditioned for it. It's literally down to the point where when movies come out, they tell us about how much it grosses on opening day, like that has anything to do with us. But we look at that being like, oh, that's crazy. This movie only got $1.8 million on its opening day. That must mean it's a bad movie. What does that have to do with you? What does that have to do with you? That has nothing to do with you. Your experience in this whole thing is still seeing the movie. How much it grosses has nothing to do. That's not coming back to your pocket. But it is shifting your opinion of the movie. It absolutely is shifting the opinion of it. Sometimes it's just bad, and I get that. Sometimes it's just bad, and those numbers do reflect that in some capacity. But the reality of it though is that, like, if you're using that to gauge your experience, then you are pretty much following the principle I'm just talking about, where you're only looking up. You know, that you're only looking at the richest things here, the most well-to-do things here. And if they're doing well, then that must be we're doing well. And that these other people just made the wrong choices. That's wild to me. That's absolutely wild. And that's why, to me, this is where we have a hard time wrapping our head around the morality of this particular situation. About how this is one of our first instances in a long time where someone of the common folk decided to take the actions of this power structure, take them personally, and take that into their own hands. That they decided that they were going to bridge this gap and just say, we're all human here. There's no classification of this, and it's wild that you think that this is okay. And it's just, I gotta say, which side of that does it really feel like? Is it fine for these people in power to make decisions that causes the sufferings of millions of people every day, and us be okay? Like, is that fine? Is that truly fine with you? Because they made the money to do it? And I'm going to be real with you. The reason why that also bothers me is because I spent my time running a small business that grew pretty large really fast. Like, as a matter of fact, as far as small businesses go, it was an absolute niche and like the perfect place you can possibly ever be as a business. Like, I guarantee you that it was a big enough niche and literally nobody else was doing it. We grew so far very quickly. However, the CEO of this company was only in it for the money, and we were in a community where it could have grown so much more than just that. In order for us to have grown to a specific point, there is really only one ethical way that we could have done it, which was paying people properly, paying them more, in fact, for the volume that we were constantly having to take on as we were getting bigger, was to pay them more for the work that they were doing, but also to include more people in on the work, which were two things that our CEO absolutely refused to do. And this was also because he wanted to take home his own paycheck. So in order for us to have grown to the revenue of being like a net worth of being like $1 million business, which we were halfway there, the things that we would have had, the things that I was like being told that I should do for the company, that was where it started to kind of pick in, because it was like not paying or not like finding cheaper supplies. Doesn't matter if they were like good enough, like kind of skipping out on some of the safety measures because we just didn't want to spare money for the equipment and save us more money here and there. Like keeping our staff below a certain point so we didn't have to pay benefits to the staff, or like keeping people off the record just so that we didn't have, so there was nothing to trace back to whenever we did overuse them for work. Stuff like that, And so to me, like when you're getting to the point where these CEOs are making a mess load of money and are basically like not only are they making a mess load of money, they're taking home actually a pretty massive paycheck. Like, to me, there's absolutely no way that that's happening without a lot of unethical practices going on, either in the sourcing of their material, because that's like food production companies are probably the worst at this, because they're so willing to just go with like, well, these and this isn't the worst. Like we don't have any records of anybody actually dying of consuming this one particular thing. So we can use this and this and this and this, unaware of how this particularly could work together or what happens under repeated oral consumption of the whole thing. We start using cheaper sources because it saves us money. We start using cheaper packages because it saves us money. Because it's too expensive to do eco-friendly packaging for everything, right? It's too expensive to pay everybody a living wage, because then you can't cut a check. Even though it is still very much so possible to run the business, to maintain the equipment, to have what you need, to even still like go with the proper sourcing. You still have all the money to do that. The only problem is that you as the CEO can't make CEO money. Like, you have to make the same money as everybody else. Or actually, really, if you're being a good CEO, you have to understand that, like, first of all, starting in a company, you don't cut a check for a while. for yourself. That's really the smart thing to do. That's unfortunately what a lot of business owners don't do. But the smartest thing to understand is that when you start a business, it's going to be a long time before you can actually start cutting a regular paycheck for yourself as the owner of the business. Pretty much everything, in order for it to be successful, especially in the earliest days, has to go back into the business. Pretty much no other way. And if you have resources to do otherwise, wouldn't it be the smart thing to put it back into the business? But no, we want to be the Elons of the world, right? That's what every business owner seemingly wants for themselves. And we also justify the nature of consistently making money. Like that as a business, the goal and the object ultimately was always to make money, more so than providing your service. I've asked this question once, and it once again stands on this really interesting moral ground where, like, the only way to provide your service is to make money. But when you are at the point where the revenue is more than the operational costs, what are we doing? You know, because are we saying that that's just justifiable, that it goes back into the pocket of the CEO? You know, because they own the company, I guess? Or, you know, is there a certain point where we've made enough revenue that can start going back into the pockets of the entire company and providing better services for what we do, cleaner services for what we do, you know? Because to me, the whole reason you start a business is for the service it provides. But eventually it comes to a point where once you start making money or start making revenue, it's almost like the whole justification becomes about revenue now. It's not about the service. It's about how much money you can start pulling in all the time. And when you start thinking along those terms, like, services for your internal structure and then your external structure just almost go out the window. It's just really hard to... There are very few examples of, at least American companies, that have shown otherwise. And the examples that do exist, you don't hear about. You never do. But that's where I'm kind of just like, you know, when you're in the billions, when you're a $1 billion CEO, when you are sitting on top of a company that is at the net worth of well more than $1 million, and like the tens of millions, the hundreds of billions, when you're well beyond that, like, you're not, like, the choices you're making at this point aren't ethical. Like, they can't all be. There's a lot of decisions that you're making to shove things under the rug. It's just, I'm sorry. It's just, it's a human principle. Okay? It's a human principle that it's a phrase, we've even made an idiom out of it, a phrase, like, about power corrupting people. And that power corrupts. And absolute power corrupts absolutely. But the thing about absolute power is that absolute power only attracts basically corruptible people. And it doesn't matter who you are as a human being. It can be me. It can be you. It can be anybody. It does not matter the kind of heart that you think that you have, the fortitude that you think that you have. When you are sitting in a position of too much power, especially over human lives, if you do not relinquish that power at a certain point, if you do not understand how much power you have, and you think that you can indefinitely make good decisions, unfortunately, you will find yourself corrupt. How? All it takes is just one really rough decision. I guarantee it. I guarantee it. Like, it's so hard it's so hard to unpack this for so many people unless you have been in the position that has affected lives. But the first time you decide that you want to do a massive layoff to protect company profits, you've done it. You've officially have jumped off the first step of corruption. It's so hard not to see that as otherwise. Like, because you can say that it was for the benefit of the company itself, the entity of itself, but what about these people? Where's the moral high ground there? You know, it's like, you're able to make a decision like that, you're going to be able to make more decisions like that. That's really just how it goes. Like, everybody's in that position. If you were king of the world, if everybody ended up being the monarch of the world at a certain point, If you didn't relinquish that, you will become the villain because you will make some decisions that will make some people upset. And you will either choose to always address those upset feelings or you will choose to eliminate them. Like, that's just how it goes. It is just how it goes. And the only other way to absolve yourself from this decision-making process is to relinquish your power and give it to someone else so that they can make the decisions, that we can see it as fresh. But this is the reason why monarchs and kings kind of died out, was because it was like everything depended on who sat in the chair. It was why we made our form of government the way it is. But unfortunately, the principle still remains whenever the chair is now many hands, but these many hands are significantly elevated above the rest. It's just like you just can't avoid it. You really just can't avoid it. And so I beseech thee to understand where we are going with this morally. That the reason why a lot of this stuff is happening has a lot to do with how we have been on the same team, but we aren't even all playing the same game, it seems like, despite being on the same team. And there are a lot of us that are actually pretty tired of that. We want to all be on the same team for once. So, take that as you will, but and regardless of kind of where you stand, we still are all on the same team. And that's where, and anybody who is trying to make moves towards this power structure is trying to level the playing field, finally, for everybody on the team. That's really what's happening.